Most parents who build wealth eventually face a quiet fear they rarely say out loud. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of what money might do to their children. Because history shows something uncomfortable. When wealth is transferred without structure, ambition often disappears. And when ambition disappears, legacy collapses soon after. This is why many families who succeed financially accidentally damage the very generation they were trying to bless. There is a pattern that wealthy families, historians, and private advisors have observed for centuries. The first generation builds with sacrifice. The second generation enjoys the stability. The third generation often loses both the wealth and the drive that created it. Not because the children were bad people, but because the system surrounding the wealth was incomplete. That is the real danger. Wealth without governance can quietly weaken the very character that created it. This is why we need to talk about something most financial planning conversations ignore, what I call the kingdom trust. Not just a legal trust, but a system designed to transfer responsibility before transferring resources. Because if money arrives before maturity, ambition slowly fades. Comfort replaces hunger, security replaces purpose, and eventually inheritance becomes a substitute for calling. Throughout history, the families that sustained influence for generations understood something most modern planning misses. Wealth must be deployed in a way that strengthens character, not replaces it. That principle is visible in the stewardship mindset associated with figures such as Abraham, where resources were never separated from covenant, responsibility, and mission. Wealth was not simply handed down, it was entrusted within a framework of identity and duty. Most modern inheritance structures accidentally send the wrong signal to the next generation. They communicate arrival instead of assignment. When a child receives wealth with no role attached to it, the message becomes subtle but powerful. The work is finished. But legacy families think very differently. They understand that wealth should expand a child's mission, not replace it. This is where the idea of the kingdom trust becomes important. Instead of thinking about inheritance as a transfer of assets, it becomes a system of succession governance. The focus shifts from how much should our children receive to who must our children become in order to carry this. That question alone changes how wealth is structured.
Because the real risk is not that children receive wealth. The real risk is that they receive it without a path to earn authority over it. When wealth arrives too early, ambition can slowly dissolve. When responsibility arrives first, ambition grows stronger. Many parents unintentionally create what I call the comfort trap. They worked hard to remove struggle from their children's lives, but struggle is often where character forms. Remove every challenge, and you may also remove the very environment that produces builders. Over time, the next generation becomes excellent consumers instead of disciplined stewards. This is not a parenting failure. It is usually a structural failure. We see a similar lesson illustrated in the story connected to Prodigal Son. Many people focus on the rebellion in that story, but there is another layer that is often overlooked. Wealth was transferred before maturity had fully formed. Resources were given without a structure guiding how they should be used. The deeper lesson is not simply about behavior, it is about timing, preparation, and governance. This is why families who want to preserve both wealth and ambition build what could be called a kingdom trust structure. In this model, money does not arrive as a reward for being born into the family. It arrives as fuel for a mission the next generation must actively participate in. Instead of simply receiving wealth, heirs step into stewardship roles. They are expected to learn, build, contribute, and grow before they control significant capital. The kingdom trust approach protects three things at the same time. First, it protects the child's ambition. When resources are connected to responsibility, the next generation still needs to grow, lead, and build. Second, it protects the family's mission. Wealth remains aligned with purpose instead of drifting into consumption. Third, it protects the legacy itself, because systems outlive motivation. One of the most powerful shifts parents can make is moving away from the idea of inheritance as an event and toward inheritance as a process. Instead of a single transfer of wealth, there is a staged development of stewardship. The next generation is gradually introduced to decision-making, accountability, and leadership. By the time significant wealth arrives, the individual has already developed the discipline required to carry it. This is the difference between simply leaving money and building a multi-generational treasury. A treasury is not just a pool of assets, it is a structure of values, responsibilities, and governance that survives leadership transitions. Without that structure, even large fortunes can dissolve within 1 or 2 generations. Many parents assume protecting their children means removing pressure from their lives, but sometimes the greater protection is giving them a meaningful burden to carry. Ambition grows when people feel entrusted with something important. When a young person
understands that their family's resources are connected to a larger mission, their identity shifts from consumer to steward. That is the real goal of the Kingdom Trust, not to control the next generation, but to guide them into purpose. Because ambition does not disappear when children receive wealth. It disappears when they receive wealth without direction. The families that succeed across generations do something subtle but powerful. They talk about responsibility long before they talk about inheritance. They teach stewardship before ownership. They make sure the next generation understands the story behind the wealth, the sacrifices, the risks, the faith, the decisions that built it. When children understand that story, wealth becomes something they feel called to protect and expand, not something they simply enjoy. And this is where many families realize something important. Legacy is not secured by documents alone. Legal structures are important, but they are only part of the equation. Without a guiding framework, what some families call a family constitution, the legal system cannot preserve identity or purpose. It can only transfer assets. The Kingdom Trust model changes that dynamic. Instead of a will that activates after death, the system begins operating while the family is still together. Children are gradually involved in discussions about mission, stewardship, and responsibility. They learn how decisions are made. They understand why certain investments exist. They begin to see themselves as part of something larger than their own lifestyle. When that happens, ambition does not fade, it evolves. Instead of working only for personal success, the next generation begins working to extend the legacy they inherited. So the real question is not whether parents should pass wealth to their children. The real question is how that wealth is introduced into their lives. Because the wrong structure can unintentionally weaken ambition, while the right structure can multiply it across generations. The Kingdom Trust is simply a different philosophy of inheritance, one that recognizes that money is powerful, but identity is more powerful. If identity and mission are transferred first, wealth becomes a tool for expansion. If wealth arrives without those foundations, it often becomes the beginning of decline. And this is why some families maintain influence, impact, and stability for generations, while others lose everything within a few decades. The difference is rarely the size of the wealth. It is the strength of the system guiding it. If you want to build a legacy that strengthens your children instead of weakening them, then the focus must shift from inheritance planning to succession governance. Because the goal is not just to pass down assets. The goal is to pass down ambition, stewardship, and purpose strong enough to carry the legacy forward.